Hi, so I got out of work tonight and then my phone was going mad with WhatsApp and the news had broke that Ozzy, John Michael Osbourne, has left the building. Comes as a real shock really because only 2 weeks ago, just over 2 weeks ago, I was watching the live feed of the Back to the Beginning gig, the Black Sabbath show, and it was just so great. And Ozzy did himself proud by getting out there and giving his final performance. Obviously, in light of this, he obviously maybe the situation was more serious than we realised, or Ozzy's kind of gone. All right, I've done my work is done, so to speak. But it's interesting just watching the news tonight. It was the top story on the BBC News. By the time I got to ITV News, the women's football team had just won their game. So Ozzy was the second top story, and it just struck me back with that how big Ozzy is in terms of how well known he is, and in doing that, he's brought metal and metal music to a wider audience. There'll be people tonight digging out the Black Sabbath albums, and young people, hopefully, maybe going down the Sabbath or Ozzy rabbit hole for the first time on YouTube or Spotify or something like that. And that'll lead them not only to Sabbath, Ozzy, but maybe some other metal. And we owe Ozzy immense gratitude for that, with everything he did for the genre. But going back to the history of Sabbath and starting them, and Ozzy had such a tough start in life. I mean, his family were pretty poor. I think his dad worked in the heavy industry in Birmingham. I think his dad actually made the crosses that Sabbath wore, around 1970. He must have like cut them out or maybe smelted them, which is pretty amazing because Ozzy had dyslexia, which wasn't diagnosed till later, and this was the reason why he never wrote lyrics. Obviously, he struggled, would suffer from word blindness, as they call it. So Ozzy, he did tough jobs. He worked in the slaughterhouse. He spent some time inside the famous horn factory. His prospects must have looked really bleak, but he got out there. He loved the Beatles, and he took his voice, went to the Sabbath, it wasn't Sabbath then, audition, and the rest is history. And I think Ozzy's contribution can't be overlooked in Sabbath. Of course, Bill is one of the finest metal drummers ever, and Guy's a fantastic lyricist, and of course, maybe the greatest of all metal bass players. And then Tony Iommi, the riffmeister, really the architect of the sound of Sabbath in a lot of ways, and of course his own hardship with losing the top two of his fingers, sort of contributing to that whole ethos. But with Ozzy, he was the secret weapon. Not only is he a great frontman, he didn't have the typical metal voice or hard rock voice back then, the sort of more the wailing of Plant or the screaming of Gillan, although he would have been inspired by that. But I always thought of him as kind of having a kind of John Lennon. It's like if you had a Beatles type singer and they'd sung heavy metal. That's what Ozzy sounded like. And this gave his voice melodic and psychedelic quality. And I think that really helped Sabbath's music to cross over a little more into areas where it normally wouldn't have. Those albums need no introduction really. The first six Stone Cold classics built the very foundations of the genre. Out of those, my favourites being Master of Reality, Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, and Sabotage. But what's happened in recent time is Technical Ecstasy and Never Say Die have been starting to get more love, and I kind of come to why I think that is. But what was interesting, before I was on Facebook and Tracy Guns from LA Guns had shared the writ, and I think he said Ozzy had written the lyrics for that, which is interesting. I'm not sure about that, but what's amazing, just how amazing Ozzy's voice sounds on that. I mean, in those two albums, Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath and Sabotage, he got an extra lift on his register, and he's really roaring it out up there, and he sounds as good as anyone. He sounds as good as anyone of his peers at that point. Unfortunately, that kind of stuff was very high for him to sing, so he didn't really tend to do those songs live. But just brilliant. But as I was going back to say, I think in recent times the Sabbath legacy has been seen more as in a continuum type thing. So originally when Ozzy left, I suppose the perception was, oh, the last two albums didn't do as well, they weren't as good. Whereas now they're kind of seen as more interesting add-ons to those classic albums with some great tracks themselves. They've still got different experimenting with the sound, and they're not trying to be like the other albums. And with the remix of Technical Ecstasy, that brought that into new light. Now, I imagine there might be a remix of Never Say Die, but I think this kind of extended the kind of creative period of Sabbath retroactively. And then, of course, Ozzy left the band, was chucked out of the band, and then he did Blizzard of Oz and Diary of a Madman. So that run of albums, of 10 albums, is a fantastic achievement. Of course, the Blizzard of Oz and Diary of a Madman albums are classics as well. Famously, I think Ozzy was trying out loads of guitarists, and then Randy Rhoads came in, played a little bit, said, yeah, you got the gig. So clearly the guy had great instincts for what guitar players worked. Interestingly, after Randy Rhoads, Brad Gillis came in. George Lynch was in the mix for a bit. But again, I think you have to say, why didn't that happen? Well, again, I think in Ozzy's instincts was like, me personally, I love George Lynch, but I don't think he would have been right for Ozzy. So his instincts there paying off, and getting Jakey Lou's the better fit for that. And of course, Zach after that. After the Darren Madman album, I don't think his albums as classic. There was a lot of good material. Bark at the Moon, Ultimate Sin, No Rest for the Wicked are all albums that I like, and have got really good tracks on, great guitar. I think probably No Rest for the Wicked is maybe my favourite of those. And then, of course, No More Tears was a big album with the title track. I never liked that album as much, but certainly in that 20-year period, Ozzy accomplished great things. I think creatively things tailed off a bit after that. But of course, the Osbournes reality show turned him into a breakout, a star who was bigger than the genre of heavy metal. And, we may have had mixed feelings about that as metal fans, but it brought the genre to a wider audience. And I think Ozzy, we can't thank him enough for that. A massive figure in the history of metal. Someone, a gateway artist. When I started getting, into metal, or I was going to get back into it in my teens, Ozzy was one of the first artists I checked out, and particularly his guitar players. It was the first gig I saw was Ozzy Osbourne at the Manchester Apollo in February of 1986. Just amazing. And then when I watched the Back to the Beginning show, I just felt I was really buzzing afterwards. And you got to hand it to Sharon for doing a tremendous job putting that together, and all the people, artists. And what a great day it was, a celebration of heavy metal. Of course, with the instigators, the creators, doing the final gig. But Ozzy's legacy will live on, most importantly through his music. When not the dust settles, but when people write about him, and they'll probably eventually write less about him buying heads off doves, or being on the reality show The Osbournes, or accidentally biting into a bat. They'll look at his material with Sabbath, his fantastic legacy of albums, his early solo albums, and his ability to write great hooks, the melodic style of his voice, and the way he could take people's lyrics, whether it's Bob Daisy's or Geezer's. Lemmy wrote some lyrics for him later on. He could just get a great tune out there. He had a really good register and a range that worked great and cut through. And that's why, he was as big as he was, as well as being an amazing performer. So, sad day, but Ozzy's gone out on his terms, I think, in a way. What a better way to go out than that gig a couple of weeks ago. R.I.P. Ozzy, we won't forget you. Cheers, man.